So, for those of you who are following this conversation, and I hope you're enjoying it, an interesting rhetorical question must emerge from the conversation of autonomy, liberty, personal sovereignty, and the rest. Why would it be that a creed such as I'm suggesting here, that has its roots buried deeply in the identity of Western civilization, emerging perhaps in the most earliest credible forms with Parmenides, perhaps Pythagoras, where would this idea of a first-person relationship to the universe, of personal sovereignty, of autonomy, of having a free and unfettered mind, why would that be such a heterodox, such a dangerous worldview that over millennia it would be an idea that needed to be rather whispered in safe settings and referred to in the most obscure of language? Why would that be the case? What is so inherently dangerous about such a worldview? If anything, it seems to be tremendously empowering and attractive. Why would we fear it so much? Well, I think the answer lies in the realization for any individual who actually makes a sincere effort to practice unfettering one's mind and practicing personal autonomy, that one discovers that what we typically call freedom is the flip side of the coin of personal responsibility, and one cannot have one without the other. For many individuals, the creativity that they have as a person is so underdeveloped that freedom for them is a waste of time. So there is no point in them reaching for freedom, as they would have nothing to do with it if they had it. And then they would have to embrace the added burden of being responsible for themselves as a person. And there's nothing for the average individual to be gained by a practice that led towards personal sovereignty or personal expression. They lack the nobility of mind, and they're uninterested in developing it, and in freedom is only loss. That might come across as savage, but I think with a little reflection, it becomes conspicuously obvious. Added to this conversation is also a recognition among individuals who are conversant in these kinds of ideas that a message of freedom without responsibility will be heard by many people who lack much moral compass as an excuse to engage in behavior that is destructive and irresponsible. For certain, freedom without responsibility is mere license. And in the hands of individuals with little character, this can only tend to destructive ends. So there was a effort to keep these kinds of ideas and this kind of philosophy occult. And within groups of people who were responsible and capable of using this kind of ideology in a helpful and constructive manner. Right? I would suggest at this moment in time, the depravity of the average individual and the lack of moral compass and the lack of character is so extreme that I can't imagine that hearing the message of freedom could really meaningfully contribute to more depravity in the average person. It seems that the lowest common denominator, the lowest and most base and least inventive drives that humanity could express are in fact the cultural norm now. And I think there's very little to be done to make that worse. But there are individuals within the population who are desperately looking for a path to a certain kind of meaning in their lives. And again, from this message, the purpose of human life is to live a life of purpose. And that purpose is found through finding connection with other, whether that other is people of quality and character, whether that's through finding relationship and connection with knowledge, with self, with the universe, with nature, with what have you. But it takes authenticity on the part of both participants for that to be fruitful. That's not going to happen within the mores of culture or society as we express it popularly. But certainly I believe that there are people who rise above that and can find themselves extremely empowered by learning that they could contemplate the world in this manner. There's a metaphor here that is useful for us to contemplate. More than a metaphor, it's a reality. If we use the imagery of prison cells and prisons in which slaves are kept, it's really worth contemplating who it is historically that builds prisons and prison cells. And in fact, it isn't the masters. It is other slaves that build prison cells for slaves. That should not be lost on us, because more than a metaphor, in fact, the primary impediment to becoming a free and autonomous individual is not going to be the pressures of the elites upon you, although they will apply pressure should you rise too boldly. No, the primary enforcement, the primary pressure by which people are kept small and in servitude and wedded to beliefs, ideologies, convention, obligations, and the rest that don't serve them, the primary police force of that is other people who are not free. There is a choice that has to be made of uncoupling oneself, disembroiling oneself from relationship to people who are deliberately, in fact, willfully, in fact, because they are unable to embrace the gift of freedom and autonomy, lacking the character or quality or creativity to do anything with it. They will only resent individuals who make an attempt to try. And don't think for a moment that the behavior, like the proverbial crabs in a bucket, of peers making an attempt to drag you down, when you make an authentic effort to engage in the process of becoming more human, don't think that that sabotage is an accident. It is threatening. It is threatening to the entire hierarchical order. And in fact, it will be seen for what it is, a radical act of revolutionary change, and it will be met with resistance as such. Don't be surprised of anything else. This is a dangerous message. Humanity, mankind, free, unfettered, decoupled from the legacy of blind ideology and serfdom. For such a perspective to arise in mass, well, it would be the blackest of all black swans. It'd be the fattest of all fat tail events. And it has perhaps the greatest potential to effect the most change in the world. Change that desperately needs to happen. I encourage you to contemplate on it, and contemplate on it for the severity and profundity that it involves. And we'll continue the conversation.